You walk down Main Street, which is quiet as most everyone has turned in for the night. A bright, almost full moon shines overhead, and combined with the street lamps, visibility is good. Then a strange light catches your eye. It seems to sway on the roof of the Mather and Gregg building. Thinking someone is up there with a lantern, you follow them as the light seems to leap from roof to roof. Suddenly you realize what you're seeing isn't a person with a lantern at all. Well, you aren't quite sure what it is. It's the size of a man, dark in the moonlight, except for that strange light, which seems to be coming out of a horn on the thing's head. Then you see wings, huge, perhaps 12 feet across. They are dark and leathery and sound like rustling canvas as they unfurl. You draw a Colt revolver from the holster on your hip and take aim. You fire, the sound echoing down the street in both directions. The creature takes off from the roof and flies at tremendous speed off into the night sky, showing no signs of being hit. Moments later, neighbors start to emerge from their homes, shotguns or pistols in hand, wondering what the ruckus is about. You consider keeping the story to yourself, worrying that no one will believe you, but decide to come clean with what you saw. Then, to your surprise, the creature that would come to be known as the Van Meter Visitor returns the next evening, seen by more witnesses, and begins a legend that is still talked about to this day. The story of the Van Meter Visitor is one that has persisted for over 100 years, and the more I researched it, the more compelling I found it to be, because Van Meter might very well have been dealing with an extraordinary life form not seen on Earth for 65 million years. Welcome to Paranormal Possibilities, where we talk about what is possible, what is probable, and what is unlikely. Today, we're examining the incredible story of the Van Meter Visitor. The story begins on October 6, 1903, in the 400-person town of Van Meter, about 20 miles west of Des Moines, Iowa, the kind of rural town where everyone knows everyone. Enter U.G. Griffith, a prominent local businessman and farm equipment dealer. Walking home on September 29th, he spotted what he initially believed was a bright light or lantern on top of the Mather and Gregg building. As he approached to investigate, thinking it was another person, the light suddenly moved to another rooftop before disappearing. Curious, he followed from below. He finally got a good look at it. Even in the dark, the moonlight shone on what he described as an enormous creature capable of moving through the air at tremendous speed. Griffith described it as a half man and half animal with immense bat-like wings. A single horn rose from its forehead, emitting a brilliant beam of light. Griffith fired his pistol, and the creature fled. On the following evening, September 30th, the town's physician, Dr. Alcott, also saw the creature. Confirming Griffith's description, he described a large winged creature with an unnatural light emanating from its head. Like Griffith, Alcott too fired several shots at the creature with no visible effect, and like the previous encounter, the creature took to the sky and fled. By this point, the folks of Van Meter were now starting to talk. 2 separate sightings of the creature from 2 respected members of the community. Then a bank employee named Clarence Dunn, suspecting it was possible criminal activity in the planning, staked out the bank from the inside overnight. He saw the same light outside on October 1st. Dunn fired towards the light, which vanished. But this time, evidence was left behind. The following morning, by the light of a new sun, 3-toed tracks were found. Dunn reportedly cast one of the prints, but it has been lost to time. The next evening, October 2nd, the most compelling encounter involved O.V. White, a hardware merchant, who heard a strange rasping or gurgling sound outside his building. When he looked out, he saw the creature perched high above the street. He grabbed a firearm and shot at it. The gunshots awakened another businessman, Sidney Gregg, probably of Mather and Gregg building fame, who came out to investigate. Gregg reportedly saw the creature descend from its perch, and his description gives us a lot of detail. He said the creature was roughly 8 feet tall, with a beak resembling a bird or parrot, large bat-like wings, and a body that moved with enormous bounds before taking flight, leaping like a kangaroo as it scrabbled for lift. There were other eyewitnesses, including one who called it an antediluvian monster belonging to some ancient forgotten age. Finally, we have J.L. Pratt, who was supposedly connected to the local mining operations and reportedly heard an appalling commotion coming from one of the abandoned mines on October 3rd. The newspaper article compared the sound to Satan and a regiment of demons preparing to come forth to battle, almost certainly a hyperbolic op-ed. Realizing the creature must be making its home in the mine, some townspeople armed themselves and gathered near the entrance. Eventually the creature emerged, but not alone. A second, smaller creature appeared beside it. A foul odor from the creatures was reported. The gathered men opened fire, filling the air with noise and lead. Neither creature appeared to suffer any serious harm, but both took flight and vanished into the night sky. The residents remained on site, reasoning the creatures would return. By morning, their patience paid off as the two-winged creatures approached the mine's entry. The men fired another volley, again with no apparent effect. The creatures vanished into the mine. This is where the official story ends and the embellishments and extra details emerge. I won't cover those because whether or not they are as reliable as the primary sourced article is unknown. There have been many theories over the last 120 plus years about what the Van Meter visitor was, what it was doing there, and where it went. Was it an alien exploring the area before returning to a waiting ship? A cryptid living in the mine? A demon? A hoaxer? My initial suspicion was that this would be a random story with no satisfying depth, but I was wrong. This might be one of the most compelling and convincing cryptid sightings on record in North America. Consider what we know about this creature based on the aggregate eyewitness testimony. Large, man-sized or bigger, huge bat-like wings, a single horn on its head with a bright light shining from within, leaves three-toed footprints. When it's on the ground, it bounds forward, hopping to get lift. It has raspy or gurgling vocalizations and a foul odor. Based on the evidence, let's pressure test the idea that this might be a surviving pterosaur of some type. It could also be a very large uncatalogued bat species, but I don't think this is as plausible given the details like a single horn, a beak, and three-toed feet. If you're a subscriber to my channel, and please consider it if you aren't, then you know I've written 4 rules of cryptozoology that I use to measure the likelihood that a cryptid might be real. Briefly, these are: rule number 1, does the cryptid's morphology align with known biology? Rule number 2, has a similar creature existed before, or is there a plausible evolutionary pathway? Rule number 3, do the local people have long-standing stories about such a creature? And rule number 4, could the environment support a breeding population? Rules number 1 and 2 are surprisingly strong. The eyewitnesses seem to be describing something remarkably similar to a pterosaur. Rule 3 is a miss because this isn't something of legend stretching back to Native American lore in the area. This was a strange acute sighting that lasted a few nights and then stopped forever. Rule number 4, though, is where this really gets interesting. Much has been written and speculated about the Van Meter visitor, including that it might have lived in the mine. I propose a different theory. What if this creature was indeed either a surviving pterosaur or an unrelated species that evolved to resemble a pterosaur through parallel evolution and didn't live in the mine at all? What if the mine was simply the doorway? Imagine a cave system stretching for miles beneath the surface, underground rivers feeding lakes teeming with fish and invertebrates, while bioluminescent fungi and animals provide the only light. Isolated from the surface for countless generations, life evolves along its own path. One curious flying predator discovers a narrow crack leading into an abandoned coal mine and for the first time reaches the world above. Crushing white light, brighter than anything the creature has ever seen, is waiting for it, but soon the light subsides and darkness falls. Emboldened by the familiar dark, the creature takes flight, struggling at first with the wind, but instincts drive it up and over a strange sight. Rows of square mounds and lights. For this creature, light equals prey. It flies down, flashes its own light, landing on the strange top of one of the mounds. The texture is unlike anything it understands, but its curiosity keeps its keen eyes scanning the ground for anything that might be edible. Suddenly, the loudest sound it has ever heard booms out. Panicked, it takes flight for the safety of the sky and makes it back to the cave. The next night it returns, and the next, and the next. By the final night, another of its kind has also discovered the crack in the mine and is emerging as well. By now, the local wildlife, with their noise and danger, drive them back into the mine. Realizing the new territory is just too dangerous, both creatures retreat back through the crack, resuming their lives in the caverns below. Maybe shifting rock reseals the gap, preventing them from ever returning. Several pterosaur species known from the North American fossil record match the general morphology described by the eyewitnesses. Human-sized, a single horn or protrusion, bat-like wings. How it moves matches what we understand of the kinetic morphology of such a creature. This isn't an absolute match, but close enough to seriously consider the idea. Remember that in 1903, the residents of Van Meter, Iowa, might not have been very familiar with what they would have called a pterodactyl. It was already a coined name within the still fairly new dinosaur craze, but it was a much more obscure example than, say, Tyrannosaurus or Brontosaurus. There would be no real way to describe what they saw beyond how they did, and yet they consistently describe what could be a pterosaur. That doesn't mean the witnesses saw a pterosaur. It means they consistently described an animal whose body plan overlaps remarkably well with what paleontology tells us about pterosaurs. The light in the nose, as I mentioned, could be an evolutionary adaptation for the low light of cavern living, or it is also possible all pterosaurs from the Cretaceous had bioluminescence. That's not out of the question. Soft tissue wouldn't fossilize, and the bone-shaped mineral deposits left behind wouldn't point to such an ability. The vocalizations are also expected. Most birds are very loud for their size. It stands to reason pterosaurs and other large flying creatures might be as well. As for the smell, I've stood by the Congress Bridge in Austin when a million free-tail bats emerged for the evening, and they have a very distinctive odor. Not just the guano under the bridge, the mass of bodies has an odor that isn't pleasant. Given the reported morphology, the eyewitness's impression that the creature is unaffected by gunfire becomes easier to understand. Think about the wings. The bullets would just punch small holes in the leathery membranes as they pass through. Lift would be impacted. It would no doubt hurt, maybe minimal bleeding, but maybe no lasting damage, not enough to ground the visitor. Also, I found it interesting that during the sightings, the moon was full or nearly full each day, and the weather, according to the local newspaper's forecast at the time, was partly cloudy. That means visibility was good. It is also important to note that nearly every witness's reaction was to shoot at the creature. I thought about the time and setting. To a person living in rural America in 1903, a firearm was a tool. You hunted with it, defended livestock with it, etc. And cartridges weren't free. You wouldn't shoot at a dark shape at night on a rooftop unless you felt like something was a threat. So for each man to fire one or more shots at it, which would surely wake up the neighborhood, was a commitment. Of course, this model has unanswered questions. The biggest is whether an underground ecosystem could realistically support a large flying predator over evolutionary timescales, but the possibility is there, even if the probability is unknowable. In researching this episode, this went from an obscure sighting in the annals of cryptozoology to one of the most compelling cases I've ever looked into. We can't say for certain what, if anything, emerged from the mine shaft near Van Meter in 1903. But if we're looking for one of the strongest historical cases for an unknown flying animal in North America, the Van Meter visitor deserves to be part of that conversation. And whether or not there is a vast undiscovered cave under Iowa supporting a full food chain of life is also not likely, but not impossible. There are caves and known formations under Iowa and the surrounding areas, and most caves are unknown until they're discovered. Inner Space Cave in central Texas wasn't discovered until the Highway Department core drilling team punched through the ceiling. After all of this, I have to wonder, what did the people of Van Meter see on the rooftops in 1903? So now it is your turn. Tell me in the comments, what do you think the Van Meter visitor was? A surviving pterosaur? An interdimensional creature? A hoaxer with a lantern? Please like and subscribe if this video was of interest. My channel is still emerging from the mine on YouTube, and I'm looking forward to growing it with you. And remember, the possibilities are endless.